Hello and welcome to an episode of Casual Friday. I'm here with the Duck. As always, the show is brought to you by Woo. Links available in the description below, especially if you're in the perp dex searching business. Don, I don't think it's the right mood for perp dexes or centralized exchanges or fucking anything at this point, because I think the main headline is DonAlt lied and people died. So what do you think of that
How did I lie? Wait, what?
I don't know. You told me alt season was coming. Privately, you told me you were 50x long. You're still bag holding your Ethereum. You baited me into XRP. You bought WIF publicly and it went down like 40%. And, that's just chapter one.
Oh, that sounds like ginormous lies to me. All of that.
We'll let the jury decide.
Please.
It is the monthly close, though. So for those of you who celebrate this technical, very
I
high
don't think there's much to celebrate.
I mean, it's a national holiday for chart people, so at least there's that much. On the 28th, no less. And that obviously makes the monthly close invalid, right? Because there aren't 30 days in the month. You can just ignore the monthly close because it's missing 2 days of data.
I like it. So
How's
we
that
wait for the yearly. So we wait for the yearly close, huh?
Yeah, people who clown on me, who were clowning on me for waiting for the confirmation of 100k acceptance by closing above it in 2025, probably don't feel so good now, do they? That's fully fucking ironic as well. Okay, so it is the monthly close today, and this is quite a big red monthly candle. If you eyeball the chart, it's actually one of the bigger ones, right?
Yeah.
This is a weird one because, I mean, this entire sample size is utterly shit. But previously, at around highs, you'd have like actually a big green candle and then a small-ish red one, right? And then it would sort of bleed down and accelerate towards the end. This is a bit different because we had that sort of, oh my god, is this the monthly candle, if you recall, which was the December one. And then January was green, so it was like, oh lol, you can't just index on one monthly candle, etc., which I think is still a good view to have. But now, counterintuitively, the big red candle is following the, post fake out signal, if you will. All of that is obviously nonsense. Can't just look at a single candle out of context and say this one's big, this one's small, this one's red, this one's green. Here's all the signal in the world. But it is interesting to fucking look at least because from a monthly perspective, I mean, it looks like it's going to be a shit close, right? I don't think there's any secret there. Like way below any of the previous 2 months of consolidation. And then if you're looking at the monthly time frame for the whole, hey, monthly is great for supports, there's kind of fuck all until 70k, right?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it has to reach 70k, but it means that if it gets anywhere into that pre-Trump win cluster, that's where you fucking pray, realistically, because that's kind of the one monthly setup where you're like, okay, this thing might be dead, but if there's ever a place for it to have a revival, it's the monthly level. It's not a magnet necessarily. It doesn't have to get there, but if you're looking at the monthly, you're not going to find any solace from the close itself, I don't think. And then you have to return to tradition of the use case of buying absolutely fucking diabolical levels when they look awful, and then praying that it resolves on the monthly. Essentially, what do you think of this time frame as we have? Maybe it closes green. I don't know, Don. There are 14 hours left. Anything is possible.
That would be impressive. No, I kind of agree. I generally, I mean, in regards to Bitcoin, I kind of I've been saying like buy 100k plus, and we never got it. Like after this consolidation, I could see myself by like if we do dip into that monthly area that you just talked about, like 60 to 70k. I think at that point, like the move is like too big. Like let's say this just keeps on dumping every single day for the next couple of days, and we dump into 60, 70k. I think at that point the move is overdone, and I might actually play some leverage again. It's been a while. Like just risk some in the 60, 70k region. But other than that, like I don't really think there's much interesting stuff here. Like right now, like at 80k, I'm just kind of like I'm looking at this from a lens of we're in the middle of nowhere on the monthly. It's still bullish technically, but it's still also nowhere. Like no support is necessarily there. So like I'm not really in a rush on this. If it goes back up and kind of shows strength back in the old cluster, in the old consolidation, then I'm down to increase risk as well. But until then, just chill, see how it goes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think there are timeframes that are more useful than the monthly, at least for the time being, right?
Yeah. I mean, if it dumps to 60, 70K, I think that's the most important time frame at that point. It's
Yes,
just,
for sure.
it needs to move a little bit. Right now, it's not that interesting. Yeah. The monthly time frame, that is.
Got it. And the weekly and the daily, unsurprisingly, I suppose, show a similar-ish picture. Because we essentially had a breakdown from a 2-month range.
Yep.
And I think this is one that we sort of spoken about previously, the highest close and the lowest close. And this is where, sometimes you wait for a close, you get shafted and you get a late signal. Sometimes you don't wait for the close and you get faked out by the early signal. There's no kind of easy answer there. They're just trade-offs, right? The obvious one being the one I just mentioned. If you want to be early to the high time frame candle, you're going to have to use a lower time frame to kind of front run it. And that comes at the risks of being the wick. Whereas if you want to quote unquote wait for confirmation on a high time frame, you'll get it, but you might have to pay quite a premium in terms of time to get the signal if a chunk of the move is already over. And I don't think there's any easy way around that. I know it's quite popular to do the whole time frame cascade where you go from weekly to daily to 4 hour to 1 minute to 5 minute, etc. But I feel like unless you know exactly what you're doing or you're using that for entry techniques, you're kind of just adding layers of noise, because what ends up happening is you're looking for whether the weekly is going to break down or not, and then you end up fucking just 1 minute charting the entire time, and that gets pretty tunnel vision pretty quickly. So on this occasion, I mean, it doesn't look like we're going to rescue the weekly, but then how good of a trade is it to wait for it and then basically say, oh, well, looks like, my detective spidey senses tell me that the weekly range is broken because we're trading like 20% below it. I should probably do something. Like that doesn't feel too good either. But I think in terms of bias and stuff, yeah, I mean, a weekly candle like this and just the way it's been, it's a breakdown from a medium length consolidation, and obviously from a market structure perspective, it's a significantly lower low close as well. So like if you're trying to avoid diddling in the middle on the weekly, realistically, I think if you care about that time frame the most, that leaves you with what, 70 as support and above 93, 94 as your reclaim thing, and everything else is kind of the thin air or dangerous pocket that we talked about previously. Do you think that's fair? Because if you recall last week, and I think even the week before, we were kind of speaking about the stuff to the left, right? And it was like, listen, the market kind of is incentivized to defend this 90K, 93K range low, because if you look to the left, there's nothing built up there that could act as support. And those types of volume profile gaps or very fast breakaway moves where support is built vertically, which is to say not built at all, you have the benefit of the market moving quickly when you're on side, but if those levels ever get retested, that's not the type of kind of structure where you'd expect to see a bounce, right? And I think that's what you're seeing now. Like up only, if you revisit it, you get down only. And it works the other way around as well, right? You have down only, and then if you make your way back up, it'll fill just as quickly, but we're obviously on the other side of that at the moment. What do you think of that weekly framework of like 70, 90, and then otherwise, low time frame trading, sure, but whatever, keep that thing away from me?
Yeah, pretty much exactly how I'm looking at it. I mean, for me, 90K plus, that's pretty obvious to kind of start like risking again.
Okay.
A lot of people might be like, hey, you're missing out on like currently 10K price action. But we could have had that discussion. Like I said the same with 100K, right? Like when we're trading below the 90, 98K resistance, I was like, I want to see acceptance above 100K again before I actually start doing anything. Then we traded into 90K support. I was still like, hey, I want to see 100K plus before I want to risk more. Now we're trading at 80K, and my kind of like my sign of strength has moved down 10K. So even if I just like bought, like I'm gonna get a better price now basically than I would have had like 2 weeks ago, even if I wait for that 10K candle to the upside, right? Just because basically the more we sell off, the lower the area that I see as kind of like reclaim or like sign of strength, like the lower that is going to be basically. So let's say we nuke, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but let's say we nuke to 40K, right? Or like 30K, and then reclaim the old range low of 50, that's where I'd be more than happy to take more risk on it again, right? And it's the same kind of story. It obviously is not the most fancy way of trading where you catch every bottom and sell every top, but right now, like with the US situation and with the world being in the way it is right now, I don't really see a point taking non-good setups. So I'm either gonna take everything is melting down, and I just think crypto's like trading 30, 40, 50% below where it should kind of trade, or I'm just taking massive signs of strength. Anything in between is just not that interesting. So yeah, boring, but it's just how it is.
Boring, but reasonable. Were you expecting the sort of 87-ish sub 90k daily range low to put up a bit more of a fight?
Yeah, I honestly thought we would like kind of bottom in between like 80, 83.
Okay.
I'm surprised that we overnight actually managed to get it below 80. Right now we're kind of like trading around 80k still.
Yeah.
I really don't like retesting any lower than where we are right now. Like I wouldn't like a daily close below 80k. At that point, it seems like I hate when you have a range and it breaks out so cleanly and you have kind of like good news and it just kind of retests that range, even if that's gonna bounce, right? Like I see a lot of people kind of looking at 70k, and I think that's a good support level for a short-term trade. But if you get that low, I'd actually be worried about just generally the state of the market. Like when we retest that kind of level, and then like let's say we bounce from 70, 72k towards like 83, 84 again, I'd be very cautious on that bounce. I could see it be like a lower high or anything of that sort.
Okay.
If we bounce from 80k, like or at least like hold the 80k region, it just looks like an intermediate kind of like pullback. We have a lot of macro weakness. The S&P's been trading like a piece of garbage. Trump's been saying a lot of things. Just generally, the world is changing very rapidly right now. So like a pullback like this isn't really that surprising. But if we start showing like even more weakness than we are right now, like all of those trades that I was talking about, like let's say we dip into 60k, for example, like I said, which I would buy with leverage, I would sell that bounce. And then maybe look again at 100k as a breakout level, right? So basically, we go any lower than we are right now and start closing below these levels. I will take trades because I think then the move is overdone and mean reversion is gonna be quite massive, right? Like let's say you get to buy 63, I think you could easily get to sell like 80k again. Like that's a really good trade, and that's gonna be a trade that you can do in like a day or two or three. Like if we actually wipe out that hard, but that would make me worried for kind of like, okay, is the cycle actually over? And I would actually want to take profit into that bounce and then wait for 100k plus again. So bounce here or go lower, then I'll buy it, but I will dump into it and I will wait for strength much higher.
So it's kind of one of those instances where the closer you get to support, the worse it is.
Yes,
I mean,
but not short term, obviously.
Yeah, not short
right?
term, obviously.
Like you get to the short term support. I'm not going to be bearish on that. It's just like longer term. I think that's quite bearish. Like if you show that much weakness into the first time where we're not getting prosecuted by the US basically for being alive.
Yeah.
I think that's bad.
Thing is, it works the other way around as well, right? Like on this show, we've spoken a lot about those breakdown type of retests and how they tend to almost never work as bearish retests, and if they do, they don't tend to make for like good tops, right? You get like a bit of a pullback, but then usually if you by the time you've retested that level, it's more of a why you here question, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna visualize that quickly on the chart. Like you have a support level on BTC or whatever, usually BTC I'd say as well, and it breaks down, and then instead of breaking down and like even if it moves further, a lot of the time, by the time it gets back to the level, if you're baby pips pilled, you're probably thinking, well, that's a classic broken support turn to resistance type of setup, I'm gonna sell. But what more often than not ends up happening is even if you get like a bit of a shallow pullback and a slight sort of technical signal there, the very fact that it made its way back to the retest level usually means that it resolves higher. And I think that I don't think it applies one-to-one as well on the support side personally, but the logic is still the same, right? Like, what are you doing back at this level if you are really bullish? Just like it works, what are you doing back at this level if you are really bearish for those types of breakdowns and retests? But I guess it'll be a look. Fundamentally, I didn't as a show focused on trading, if you will. That's still your kind of Super Bowl, right? You've got a monthly level lined up, massive range level that's being retested like months after a breakout. Like, you still trade that, but I think it's more on the, and let me know if you disagree with this, it's more about like managing expectations on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have a dominant trend and it's like early/intermediate, which is always very hard to tell in the moment, but like the market will tell you, and you catch one of those wipeouts, your expectation will be that it V-reverses into a new high, right? And that immediately affects like your trade management and your take profit levels and your sizing to some extent and all those other things. Whereas you can have the same level in a different market environment or regime, like you think the trend is cooked or it's just going to be an oversold bounce. Even if you're trading the same level, the management side is completely different because you're not expecting the V reversal new high type of resolution. And that's something we spoke about last week as well, right? How like it just seemed like the market was still very much hungover after the leverage wipeout. And there was a lot of expectation that, okay, well, this is like I mean, this goes back to that wick from a few weeks ago, right? Like the 3rd of February wick on ETH, etc., being like, oh, well, there you go, there's the leverage wipeout, and now we go up. But it's quite rarely the case, especially for like huge, humongous leverage wipeouts, that those are the ones that lead to V reversals. In the past, from looking at like global open interest stuff, there is like a sweet spot for what qualifies as a flush, right? Like if the trend is strong and you get short-term, like low time frame leverage wipeouts, those tend to be quite good because, the more patient traders, if you will, and the more over leverage, well, the patient traders get rewarded on the back of the extremity of the move over leveraged apes getting wiped out, and like that's fine and healthy in exchange of coins, right? But what you get when this sort of mass liquidation wipeout happens, where open interest just gets completely fucking created, it's kind of bad for everyone, because at a certain magnitude, like past the sweet spot, it just tends to sort of kill speculation. There are a lot of second order effects, a lot of trades get unwound, the books are thinner. People are much more reluctant to kind of bid it up in the same way to get a V reversal. The ask side is thicker once the market does settle, and so on and so forth. So like I think you can find shows from 2021 discussing this, but there is like a sweet spot for what qualifies as a nice trend resuming open interest wipeout, but past but it's not like a linear relationship. Like, okay, this was a massive reset, now we're really clear to fucking go. Like that type of thing just doesn't work. There is a nice sort of middle ground where there has been enough of a wipeout of the most speculative people, but the rest of the market still has money and still wants to bid. I just think
that's the problem this time.
Yeah.
Because everyone's fucking poor now. Like, it's crazy how extractive the cycle has been, where it's just everyone's poor. I think because otherwise this could have been like the 3rd of February. I think that was the day where it completely died on the altcoin front. I think that could have been it, even on the USD pairs, because on the Bitcoin pairs, like it kind of still looks like that was the bottom, right? To me, you go on any of the strong coins, the 3rd of February wick is by far, like against Bitcoin, like that's the bottom on pretty much every single coin, for now at least. But the problem is basically there's very little money that people have left, and that it usually takes a little bit of time until people either have money left back again, or something changes in the market, or all that kind of stuff. And I do agree with you, like when you get these massive wipeouts where everyone loses, it's basically just like someone has to pay for this, and when you stop speculating, because you kind of lost it all, and then people are also not really interested in buying the dip because they got burned so much, it's usually not the best for the market, which we've kind of been dealing with. But I think with generally the biggest kind of story for this cycle is just the meme coin fallout. This is what we're dealing with right now, where it just takes a little bit of time to heal for people. And I don't know how long that might be, and how much it affects Bitcoin, because at the end of the day, like, it's very different people that bought Bitcoin and meme coins. And if you look at Bitcoin, this is kind of like a typical pullback, right? Like, it's 30% at current stage. It's actually stuff we didn't even talk about like a couple of years back. Like, anything above 40% used to be kind of like where people were like, I mean, what are you even complaining about?
Yeah, I mean, volatility sensitivity is completely different. You know, like if you're down 80% on a meme coin in a single day. I mean, look, BTC just doesn't affect most people anymore.
Yep.
At least not directly. Obviously, indirectly it has a massive impact, as you can tell by the watch list. But directly, because of all the dispersion and altcoin concentration, meme coin concentration, it's a bit of a different game. It almost feels. I mean, look, at this point, it's almost like a shitty perfect storm where, I mean, the meme coin people got wiped out for extraction mania purposes, and then in the past, the argument, and in the recent past, the argument would be, yeah, but look, BTC is still like relatively holding up because it's a different group of buyers, right? But then if that different group of buyers then gets a reason to still sell their BTC, it's not like the rest of the market is going to be insulated from that, you know? And I do think there is some spillover that happens eventually. It just took a while. I don't know if you agree with that analysis or not. But like at a certain point, when you see the market and altcoins and speculators and the extractive nature, and they're all just getting completely rammed, it's hard to completely detach from that and say, oh, well, BTC is like completely its own thing and everything can go down 100%, but BTC will still be fine. And I think that thing is, it's not the worst thesis in the world, and it held true for a while, but it just needed like a little nudge from macro or whatever else, and risk sentiment, even if the assets have a bit of dispersion, like risk sentiment as a whole, when you think of crypto as an umbrella term, that's much harder to decouple. You'll recall a few weeks ago we used this like Bitcoin bull market, altcoin bear market type of thing, and I think that's basically been the last 2 months, right? It's actually been a very anomalous, very crazy 2 months where if it were anywhere else, you'd be like, oh my god, this cycle is cooked. Like Trump launched a coin and like all this other stuff, and BTC was still holding up, and it did so for, I think, for a remarkable period of time. But now that, you know, you give it a bit of a nudge, and here we are essentially. I think a useful question is, do you have a framework for determining like an intra-cycle pullback on BTC? Like, hey, the trend is intact, business as usual, 30-40%, yeah, it's a bit more off the top than I'd like, etc. But overall, the dominant trend is intact, versus, hey, okay, this is pretty nasty. It might be cycle top, but it will offer bounces on the way, so I'm going to trade those. Is there any kind of, from a framework perspective, differentiation between those two for you? And if so, I mean, which one are we in?
I mean, how I used to do most of this is using altcoins, kind of like guiding me into where we are in the cycle, kind of like just see how everything is going, see how much retail speculation there is, all that kind of stuff helped me determine whether like I thought the top was in or not, and whether it was just a bull market pullback or like actually bear market. Problem this cycle is that everything's changed. Like, everything's trading very differently. We're not trading the same way we used to in prior cycles. We didn't really get much altcoin appreciation besides extractive games on memes. And then you have to think about, okay, is that like the reason why we didn't get any big moves besides like on XRP and Solana maybe? Is that because there was just too much money taken out of the market, or is it because it's still coming, or is it? And it's really hard to answer. Like, I genuinely think this is gonna, besides like just having held Bitcoin all cycle for some people, right? I think it's the hardest cycle that we've had so far. And a lot of people disagree because they're like, hey, Bitcoin's only down like 30-40%. Like, what are you talking about? But I would say like, the reason why it's so hard is because most people just got baited into altcoins, and they didn't really appreciate as much as they usually did in the stage of the market that we were in. So we're kind of like in this situation where it's just for me, really hard to say. I kind of feel like, and especially with the last few days, like my feelings getting a little bit stronger and stronger, that altcoins are like oversold in a way. But that's in stark contrast to the fact that I think all of them are going to go to zero, right? So I have this thing where I look at the recent altcoin strength, right? Bitcoin's down 5% day after day after day after day. And a lot of the times, in the recent days at least, you've seen altcoins be down 0%, up like 2%. Litecoin was up like 20% yesterday. Retraced some of that today, but only on the USD pair, where like it's the same losses as Bitcoin. So I kind of like I'm looking around and I kind of see a lot of altcoin strength where there should be weakness. Because when you think about it, like the cycle's been massively extractive. Altcoin's been kind of like shitting the bed at any sign of weakness from Bitcoin and have only been able to go up if Bitcoin looks like it's going to infinity. And then during the range between like 110 and 90K that we had on Bitcoin, like every time Bitcoin sold off to support, altcoins went basically to zero. And then Bitcoin bounced and altcoins didn't really outperform. So you had this kind of like vicious cycle of just like Bitcoin goes to support, altcoins dump 50%. Bitcoin bounces back to resistance at 100K, and altcoins bounce back like 10%, but they lost 50% before, and then that over and over and over again. So altcoins are down like 80% across the board, and now we're seeing kind of like the opposite, where there's a lot of strength in the altcoin market, while there's very little strength in Bitcoin. Like it's surprisingly weak after this breakdown, and the altcoins are surprisingly strong. So I kind of feel like the moment this balances out, like if Bitcoin wipes out completely, like I said, to 60, 70K, and we get a complacency bounce, I think that could actually just straight up be like a period where altcoins just go completely ballistic. But that would also kind of make me think that the cycle tops in generally. That's kind of like been a behavior we've had in the prior cycle, coming back to the question that you had, where Bitcoin tops, dumps, altcoins dump with it, but weaker. And then they just go completely ballistic on the complacency shoulder. Everyone thinks the world is fine again. And then the market tops generally and everything goes to zero, right? Like that's been prior cycles. That's been how 2017, 18 played out. Basically, altcoins were doing all right on the sell-off. They were struggling while Bitcoin was going up, and then they completely ripped to the upside on the complacency shoulder. So maybe that's where we are, and this is just kind of like the same cycle that we had in 2017, 18. Maybe it's just like a pullback, and we're just so early in the cycle that the prior top signals don't really work. For me, it's really hard to say.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't want to make that argument. To me, like a president launching a meme coin is very much top of the cycle things. But also, I think there could be more room, at least for altcoins to go. So like I don't know, and it's why I think it's the hardest cycle, because at least for me it is, because in prior cycles I was pretty damn certain that we would get something, and we got it pretty much every time. This time around, like if we went to zero from here, like the typical bear market, like everything just goes down and just disappears. Like I wouldn't be so surprised, because we had all the top signals that we would need, like literally just like the whole extractive mania that we had. But also we didn't really get like an old season. We didn't really get any. The fact that Bitcoin went to 100K is great, but when you think about the prior cycle having topped at 70K, and back then everyone was against crypto, now everyone is for crypto, and it's just like a little bit higher, that would be a little bit disappointing.
Sure.
So you kind of like, you measure those things up together, and you kind of like, okay, where do I stand? Like this was a shit cycle if this is the end.
It's like, I'm not rich enough for this to be the cycle top, therefore it's not the cycle top.
I mean, it's been a good cycle for me. Like I'm not complaining, but it just generally, like compared to prior cycles, it's been underwhelming, especially given the new regulatory landscape. But that could also just be like, and this is something we've had before, right? Like we top on good news and then everything just kind of dumps and then we go through a bear market.
I mean, markets generally top on good news for what it's worth, right? And bottom
Yeah,
out
yeah.
on
I mean,
bad
that's just
news
how it
when it
works.
stops having diminishing impact. I think one of the funniest things for me is all the discussions where the top signals were top signals was a top signal. Like,
yeah,
everyone's
everyone's like,
week? It was like 2 weeks or something where the
oh, it was a
entire
little bit more
timeline.
even.
Yeah.
Basically, about everything above 100K, everyone was talking about like this is a top signal, but is a top signal really a top signal?
Yeah, so like, listen, it can't be a top signal if everyone's like discussing whether it's a top signal. Like that entire
like no one,
conversation was mental.
the whole tweet of, and that I saw from pretty much everyone. Everyone tweeted the same thing, being like, at tops, people don't talk about tops. And it's like, that was the whole thing above 100K. No, we're trading at 80. And I mean, that's Bitcoin, right? And they were talking about altcoins.
No, sure.
And altcoins are literally, I think altcoins went through a proper bear market, just generally. Like you cannot really, like you bought any altcoin at the top, you're at least down 60%. Like on anything that might, like that isn't just Bitcoin or ETH. I think like almost anything in the market, you'd struggle to find something that isn't down like 60%, and it goes all the way to like 99 to 100%, right? Like so the altcoin holders went through the most brutal bear market that I think altcoin holders have had in the last 10 years, because it was really unfair in a way, right? Like you hold an altcoin, you see Bitcoin trade at 100K, and you keep losing money. And there's really no good reason for you to be selling that altcoin, like from a normie perspective, right? You're like, crypto's strong. I just need to wait for like the market to kind of start bidding my altcoin again, because Bitcoin is at 100K. I mean, why would I be bearish? And then you just sit there and you lose 10%, 20%, 50%, 80%. And you're just like, what the fuck is this shit? Right? Like, it's so disgusting. And I think that was straight up like the worst altcoin bear market we've had in a long time, just based on that. Because it was, the other times you could be like, hey, I should have seen the signs. Like everyone was talking about the altcoins, stuff went up like 100x. This time around, and then Bitcoin nuked, right? And people were buying altcoins into the complacency shoulder. It's like, I mean, it's kind of your fault, right? But in this instance, it's a little bit like, it was a little bit harder to say on the altcoin front. Like Bitcoin was trading at 100K, wasn't showing any sign of weakness other than just being in a range. And you're sitting there and you're down 90%. Like, that's fucking brutal.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the dispersion cuts both ways, right?
Yeah.
You've got to really be clued into. I mean, I think that's what to some extent made previous cycles easier. You could more or less tunnel vision on BTC and get a pretty fucking good view of the market.
On everything. Yeah.
I still think that's generally true, but like less true than before. And especially if you have like massive altcoin dominance, like on perps by volume and like all those types of things, you need to kind of keep tabs on where the flows are. Like even in 2021 to some extent, like you know, Sol, Luna, AVAX, etc. When those things really started to tire out, that was like an earlier signal than BTC shitting the bed, because this thing just goes sideways and people gamble on altcoins, and then when the altcoins stop, only then people start paying attention to BTC, saying, oh, but BTC is fine, don't worry, our altcoins are going to be okay. So it's like a sort of convenience switch, right? Like if you want to gamble on altcoins, you're like, well, BTC is moving sideways anyway, this is where the market's at. And then altcoins start looking like shit, suddenly BTC is relevant again, because you're like, oh, but hey, why is this happening? Look, this thing is fine, so we're fine. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think you either use it or you don't use it. I'm still on the use it side, because I think it's generally quite helpful. And I don't want to paint the picture that like BTC was just this amorphous blob of zero signal, and then it was all the telltale signs were in the altcoins, because we were getting a shit ton of good news on BTC that was getting completely absorbed. Now that's not sexy on the chart, but it's still pretty good signal in general, right? Or at least like worth investigating. It's not like there was a full disconnect between BTC's strength or weakness and then what ultimately happened in altcoins. Like we had Saylor keep blowing his load into this thing, a bunch of news, which admittedly was noisy, but ultimately failed to resolve higher. And then the order of operations was a bit fucked here with altcoins nuking as hard as they did even during the range. But I think that just ended up being a brutal trap, right? Like you'd think, oh, look, altcoins wiped out and BTC is still strong. That's a good setup. And you know what? That's actually not the worst argument in the world, right? But it was more of a, that goes back to the age old, is it weakness or is it lag type of thing?
It's really hard to
which
say.
is really hard. I mean, this is the whole thing. Like when we talk on the show, it's like very real, and like a lot of this stuff is very hard. Like the lag or weakness stuff is hard, and is this like a trend? Is this pullback in line with the trend, or is it trend reversing? That's also hard. Like my answer to that question, for example, is really boring. I just always treat it as a non-trend reversing bounce, and then I give myself room to be pleasantly surprised if it goes further than I think, right? So, you know, if it hits whatever 70 crazy whatever discount number, I will still trade that level as a trader, and then, you know, get out at mid 70s, 80, whatever the first trouble area happens to be. And then for me, that trade is done at that point. And then if the market reverses, like V reverses, and ends up reclaiming even higher levels and pushing towards all-time high, it's my job to then find another trade that reflects that. I just personally find it easier to go sort of with the fewest number of assumptions per trade at any given time. Maybe it's because I'm dumb, but that's what kind of works best for me. Like if I'm already have to think about a bunch of shit if I'm punting a level, I'm like, okay, well, this is some sort of place where I think we're going to bounce. There's enough there for me to think about and manage without then going 2-3 layers of abstraction into what kind of bounce is it going to be? Where exactly is it going to peter out? What if it V-reverses? I want to hold some of my position for that. Like all of those counterfactuals are way too complicated. I will kind of just treat it as a, here comes the meme, you know, the mechanical bounce that it is, that this thing is just mega oversold into a good level. People are trading at bad prices. It's going to mean revert. And then if it outperforms and goes beyond expectations, then that'll have to be part, you know, I either miss it or it has to be part of another trade, you know? Because as unsexy as that sounds, the alternative is you get really good entries on what should be really good trades, but then you end up round tripping them because your expectations are too inflated. And that thing, I personally, my psychology doesn't deal well with at all. I'm like terrible at those trades and have been since, like, you know, I will just get dejected if I get fully round tripped on what should have, you know, if I ignore the first trouble area and the market round trips on me from the level of resistance that ordinarily I should be selling. I've been burned by that way too many times. So I take the boomer approach of, you know, oh, first trouble area, treat it as resistance till proven otherwise. And then if it does better, great. But it's on me to make it work separately, you know?
Well said, yeah. I agree.
That's me at least. I don't know, man. Like overall, as much as we like to muse and pontificate from a cycle perspective, like the dispersions made it tricky. I think the way this unraveled sort of makes it look like inverse causality, right? Like altcoins dragging BTC down type of thing, which we have seen, but like the duration of the range definitely added some noise to that. Where, as mentioned previously, you could have made a decently evidence-based argument that this is, you know, there's dispersion, the altcoins got wiped out, BTC still looks good, so there's no strong reason to worry about BTC. Like, in a vacuum, I think that makes sense, but then with some of the headline stuff and Sailor and Buy a Bit Hack and so on and so forth, you were getting some signal in BTC. For me, the main thing for not doing business at the extremities, like rebuying 90 or whatever else, it was kind of twofold. The first is just general busyness and laziness at the same time, just fully transparently with like breakout stuff and whatever else. And on our show, how, you know, we've discussed levels being tested like over and over and that not being super attractive. It just allowed me to pigeonhole BTC, if that makes sense, to like, oh, well, this is just kind of a sideways thing. And if it resolves, like, okay, maybe there'll be something interesting through the extremity or whatever else. But it's not shouting at me to pay attention to it. So that essentially saved my skin on this. And then on the altcoin front, you know, I was just like logging into Twitter every day and it was like LA vape cabal drama, Trump inside the melee. And there's just like, I don't know about you, but like mentally, I just kind of switch off with stuff like that. I was like, I don't want to be paying a ton of attention to this. And thirdly, the main thing that was also discussed last week was for better or for worse, sometimes it works really well, sometimes it works poorly. It's this overarching view that we sort of summarized with last week, that after you get these massive liquidations and there's this hack and there's a big fucking wick, like the market just isn't a particularly isn't primed for upside in those types of cases, right? I think that was discussed pretty explicitly. When you have those types of big wipeouts, big wicks, everyone's expecting a V reversal, and then the market just kind of goes sideways and it's pretty miserable. I just look at that at a glance in the first 5 minutes of my day and sort of switch off and go do other stuff. Now it makes it sound like this laziness is some sort of superpower, but obviously it'll cost me a lot of money when the market is trending as well. If I'm like, well, this isn't really my cup of tea, or maybe I'll get a pullback, etc. And you look at it the next time and it's up 50-60% and you feel like an absolute idiot, right? Like, I think fundamentally as a trader, it's your kind of duty to execute your edge if you have one. That's definitely something I don't do super well nowadays, some for legitimate reasons, some for completely illegitimate reasons. But after those types of big wipeout type moves, you kind of let the market tell you how it's feeling. And if that kind of wipeout move wick happened, at 70k on the way up or whatever else on the strongest altcoin a few months ago, you'd be remiss not to buy that blindly. But then the market had like 2 weeks or however long it was after that. I mean, probably, longer, right? Like a couple of weeks from the February wick to kind of prove something and do something, and it didn't. Instead, we got Saylor top lasting to no effect. We got his face on time or whatever, right? You had like
cursed
S&P weakness and all this other stuff, and it was just a bit meh. So all of that to say absolutely nothing, Don, because people don't care. They're here for the TA, but the TA is kind of crap and boring. I think to surmise everything we've said, like 80k round number is short-term interesting, and medium to long-term interesting, it'll have to be 90 plus or monthly discount around 70. What do you think of that?
Yeah, pretty much exactly. Sick. I think just generally, it's just zooming out, taking like either this just completely oversells and then it's a goodbye anywhere close to like below 70, I think, like close to 70 below. Anything there, I would kind of go at with leverage personally, or above 90. I will probably take on more risk there too. As long as we're trading in between, I mean, it's not that interesting TA wise. The more interesting TA that we can do, I think, is on altcoins.
BTC dominance.
Yeah, Bitcoin dominance.
Bitfinex
I think
long shorts TA. Let's do some of that.
I mean, Bitcoin dominance, we can talk about it because I think that's actually topped.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
You use BTCD for that, right?
Yeah, BTCD. I generally think we are at the top or very close to the top of Bitcoin dominance, at least for a little bit. Now, Bitcoin dominance is a little bit of a bullshit chart because it has, at least it used to have, I'm pretty sure it still does, have stablecoins in it. And stablecoins are pretty much the killer app of crypto. Like, it's the thing that's actually really cool in crypto, in my opinion. And people will get mad at me for saying this, but it's the thing that I like the best that we have right now, besides just Bitcoin. If I could invest in stablecoins, I would. But obviously, if you buy stablecoins, I'm not going to have much percentage of returns there. But I generally think we've reached the top here on Bitcoin dominance. In the next from where we are right now to let's say 65%. Like I'm gonna be wrong. I mean, we went to 65%, so I'll say if we make a new high, I'll just be hilariously wrong. But I think Bitcoin dominance has topped for now. Problem is, if Bitcoin goes lower, doesn't really help you much in altcoins. That's what I'm like. For example, I bought Litecoin. I think it was 2 days ago. Time really hard, but it's 2 days or 3 days ago. And I was up 20% for a little bit. And now Bitcoin dumped 10%. So I'm only up 10% on the Litecoin buy, even though Litecoin Bitcoin is going to the moon. And I just generally think you're kind of shit out of luck as long as Bitcoin doesn't start aggressively dumping. If it starts slowly dumping, that's fine. And you can take advantage of the Bitcoin dominance decline. But just generally, I called the BTC top on Twitter on the 25th of February. And I think that's going to hold for a while. I'd be shocked if not.
Yeah, it's a crap way to get it if altcoins keep getting pulled lower.
Yeah,
Right.
it's what I said about ETH, where I was like, hey, there's a chance that we're basically like you don't get a bull market on ETH, and then the moment everything transitions into a bear market, ETH holds up better, and you're kind of like you're outperforming everyone, but you're still not very happy because you're still like break even or like lose a little bit of money, um, while everyone else is losing a shitload, but not making any, right? And it's kind of the same story right now, where you wouldn't be so like I'm not too excited that I'm right on Bitcoin dominance, like so far at least, like going down a bunch. Like my Bitcoin pairs are all doing quite well for the coins that I'm trading, but it doesn't really help if if Bitcoin dumps like 10%, because even if you get like a 20% bounce on an altcoin, or like you catch the Litecoin Bitcoin bottom, and it goes up 20%, like if Bitcoin goes down 10, you're up 10%, and then if Bitcoin goes down another 10, you might even be down, even though you got the Litecoin Bitcoin trade, right? And you could obviously hedge that by shorting Bitcoin, but I'm not really feeling like doing that. So, but I just thought I'd mention it because we shit talked altcoins a lot. My opinion on altcoins is actually that they're kind of like oversold in a way. It's always hard for me to say this because I generally think all of them are gonna go to zero. So when I'm bullish, it kind of feels like I'm telling people like things that I'm not really convinced by, because I just generally think they're gonna go down, and it's always just temporary that I'm bullish. But right now, I feel like they went down too much and have good looking charts. Like I look at Litecoin Bitcoin. I don't know if you've opened up that chart. You go
Let me
on.
swing it up. Your favorite BTC pair.
I mean, just look at the Litecoin Bitcoin
Oh,
daily chart.
dude, my trading view autofilled to the Litecoin Bitcoin, like Litecoin Bitfinex longs or whatever. So that's good.
Yeah, I fucking hate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, there we go.
I mean, you look at Litecoin Bitcoin, you're like, what the fuck? Like, how is this possible with Bitcoin trading piss weak, right? Like, because that's relative strength to me as well. Like, you get Bitcoin and the entire market just kind of losing confidence, and you see something like this, where it's just aggressive buying into this whole like down move on Bitcoin. That's relative strength to me. Like that's a good looking chart, low time frame. Higher time frame, the more you zoom out, the worse it gets.
Could it be a psyop? Is there some sort of, I don't know, market microstructure argument that can be made where, you know, BTC has leverage and has more aggressive participants, and that's getting, and those people get unwound and pushed around a lot harder than they would on Litecoin, which generally has less open interest, less futures participation, sort of less open interest. So
I kind of
it's not kind of buying Litecoin. It's more that, you know,
it's actually a really good argument.
do you know what I mean? Like, I haven't
But
phrased it
I
very well there, but it's more like no one gives. The colloquial version is no one gives a shit about Litecoin, and it's not that people want to buy and are buying Litecoin. It's just people want to sell BTC more, if that makes sense.
I mean, I like it. I like the argument because usually that's the case. But in this case, we've seen like Litecoin like sold off with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin showed a little bit of strength, and you got aggressive buyback on Litecoin.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair.
Which is different from, and I do agree with you, because sometimes what happens is basically like you have like 2 3 4 guys just bidding an altcoin market because they like it, and then Bitcoin nukes and they don't remove their bids, right? And then you get Litecoin Bitcoin mooning, for example, because there's bids there ready to buy it up, which makes like the price stays the same, right? Like if you have a Litecoin USD bid at 100, Bitcoin dumps 10%, and then you basically get like if your bid holds up the market, Litecoin Bitcoin is going to go up by 10%, right? But in this case, what we saw is just, to me at least, what looked like aggressive buying, which is interesting, right? Like that's just generally like a sign of strength in a weak market. So therefore, I kind of like I look at these, I look at all the kind of like Bitcoin pairs, and on most of them, I like the ones, at least from the ones that I like, I actually just see like a strong chart. Whereas it's been a really weak chart and it's been dragged up by Bitcoin. So I think that could, the moment Bitcoin kind of like starts being less of a piece of shit,
Right.
you could actually see really good price action on altcoins, especially now that the meme coins are kind of like dead. The pump fund stuff's basically died out completely. There was too much extraction.
Like nothing's
And
getting bonded to rate. Have you seen that stat?
yeah, zero, basically zero. So
Not the
like
best
no one,
graduation rates that I've seen.
no.
If it were a school, it'd be fucking shut down by now.
Yeah, I mean it should, but basically the casino closed ish. The Seoul casino closed at least for a little bit, and I think the moment you get any Bitcoin strength or any kind of like consolidation, people are going to look for the new casino, and I think the new casino is going to be the old casino. And the only narrative, and it's something that I've been talking about a long time, and those are the coins that have been doing decently well, is the whole you get an ETF, right?
So Solana.
I mean, one of them, yeah. Solana just has the problem that basically all the crime was on Solana.
Right.
And if you remember back, like with BNB, we had all the crime on BNB in 2021, 2020. Yeah. We had all the crime on ETH in 2018, right? Both of those things didn't really recover from those. The ETH BTC top is still, let me check if I'm saying anything wrong, but in my recollection, it's still 2017, 2018. Yeah. Like we never went above the highs on 2017 and 2018 on ETH BTC ever. That's where crime was the biggest on ETH. And then we moved to BNB, and the same story happened basically in 2021, 2022. BNB didn't really make new highs like this cycle at all. While Solana just kind of like got really close.
Yeah.
So like what happens, at least like that's kind of how I make sense of the market. Basically, if you burn too many people, they just stay away. And it's just like people don't like to talk about the coins that they just lost a shitload of money on. They much rather talk about stuff that they actually make money on. So it's kind of like Solana has a little bit of a hangover in a way. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the best bet. I think any Solana competitor that doesn't have that backstory of everyone losing a shitload of money on the chain has a really good chance to kind of like take the spotlight from Solana. So I think Solana is like, it could claw back and be the dominant chain again, but I think it has an uphill battle. I think Solana competitors are actually a better bet. There's a few, I don't really care about them too much. I'm too much a boomer. But like if you want to have the Solana trade, I think it's somewhere else. If you want to have the ETF trade, I also think it's somewhere else because there's coins that don't have that. Litecoin, for example, performing exceptionally, doesn't have any of that overhang just because Litecoin doesn't do shit. People are going to be upset at me again because I said that. But like there's a few coins that just don't have that kind of tainted history in the ETF basket that I just like better. But I mean, Solana is still like, I'm not shit talking Solana for the sake of it. I just think like that overhang of kind of like negative perception and basically all that legal shit that we're going to talk about. I mean, you have like, I don't know if you saw the whole like Trump, the Trump thing on with Congress and like just
family members launching or members of
Congress. Yeah, fucking
like
hilarious.
It's around coin launchers and stuff, right?
Yeah, did you see the video? Fucking hilarious.
I haven't seen the video, no.
So basically, like a guy went on stage ish and had like a whole chart of the Trump coin, and he was just like, "Look, this is where it launched. This is where Trump made billions."
Oh Jesus!
And then like the chart just literally just creates to zero, right? The one that he has.
Yeah.
And he's just like, yeah, and this is where retail lost the billions.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, dude, this is crypto now, right? On the biggest stages in the world. Like, and I think that's gonna be like, obviously, if the Democrats are in any shape or form smart, they would lean into something like this, right? Like, I don't know why they haven't done that.
So you're saying
yet.
They won't?
Yeah, they might actually not. But just generally like that negative press, other coins don't have it. I think they're more interesting.
Yeah, just you know, it just feels like we're living in two different worlds. Like there's also news dispersion. Like if you look at the market right now, tell me where the headline is that the SEC's basically dropped all of their fucking
Yeah.
cases and the CFTC or whatever said that memes aren't securities. Like, can you imagine if the market were in good shape, what the candles would look like? I mean, the SEC just literally, explicitly, in a very short period of time, gave up its war on crypto. That's insane, right? But I feel like that news got completely covered by the crappy price action that followed. And that was like an overhang of sorts. At least it was like a macro regulatory overhang of sorts for a while, because it was like MetaMask, it was Consensus, it was Coinbase, and the list just goes on, right? And now,
Yeah.
like literally in the same week, we just saw a string of settlements, and like the war is literally over. There's just another war going on at the same time in the order books. So you forget that the first one took place at all. And the first one is a pretty big deal, right? Because this is like big companies, US facing regulation, signs of real change at the agency and the US's position. All of that stuff should be good. But it's not, because the market is red. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
if you're following like institutional headlines and you don't pay much attention to like alts, memes, or whatever, you must be like, oh, the market must be loving this. Like uncertainty's been resolved. Then you open up TradingView, like, oh my god, what on earth is going on? You know, like
Yeah.
obviously to some extent, I think one of the clearer inferences is that was like both the market is crap, so the news doesn't have much of an impact, but also, unfortunately, it does lend credibility to the argument that it was priced in to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Because like the Trump rally didn't come out of nothing. Like we were in a absolutely awful range from what, March till October, and it resolved very violently to the upside and with Trump's win. And I think a lot of that momentum, a lot of that buying was necessarily pricing in like a better regulatory environment, pro crypto regulation. People were thinking tax breaks. I mean, some of the stuff people were thinking strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? Like straight up purchasing Bitcoin. Also, to be explicitly clear, a ton of that post-Trump momentum move was also just like Michael Saylor eating the entire order book for days and weeks on end.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that gets forgotten about as well to some extent. And so we basically had the flurry of good news, a bunch of stuff priced in, and then Michael Saylor just keeps blowing his load in the range. And then the second memes get full max extraction rugged on like a multi-presidential level, and then the moment there's some weakness both in macro land and whatever else, like BTC just unwinds and alts already getting like an extra beating on top. But yes, I think overall, I'm quite optimistic that the SEC kind of gave up, right? Like that's good for the US and good for crypto. And this is something we've spoken about on this show as well, how just straight up capricious the agency seemed under Gensler of targeting the seemingly compliant, trying to be as good faith as you can be, trying to register actors. Like I'm glad that's done. I think it's bullish, but it's one of those things that you then need to build on. You know, I think it was priced in a fair bit. It's good for the medium to long term, but it's not like at least in these conditions, a short-term catalyst. Because it's more like, okay, you don't have the SEC's boot on your neck. What are you going to do now? Like, what are you going to build? What apps, etc.? Obviously, the answer is going to be nothing. Maybe some gambling apps. But at least that one's out the way. So
yeah, I think I mean, this is as positive as it can be.
Yes.
Considering like,
and the market just does not care, dude.
Yeah, but the problem is basically, I think people underestimate how fucked the market got by the whole meme coin shenanigans this cycle. Like, there's so much money went down the drain and so much reputation too. Like at this point, like most people just kind of, and even crypto participants kind of went this whole nihilistic approach, right? And everyone was kind of like, yeah, but I'm just here to make money. Like, and meme coins are this and that, and I'm just here to like retire my bloodline. That's kind of like that was the narrative for a long time. And when you have that narrative for too long, and that's kind of everyone talks about, like normal people are obviously not gonna get into that, right? Like if you don't understand like the whole crypto space, and then everyone like talks about like, yeah, this is like, I'm just playing these rug pulls because that's just how the game is played, whatever. Like anyone sane that actually has a life, right? Like that has like a family, or is like someone that's kind of like good in business, like anyone that actually like has an impact is probably gonna be less interested in that than the future of finance, right? And I think we kind of like, as a community, kind of like fucked ourselves in a way with that whole approach, and we're feeling the aftershock. Um, just like a lot of money extracted, a lot of credibility lost, and I also think because like, let's be real, like most markets kind of like are US centric, right? Like most of, like we had ETFs in Europe, they don't really do shit to the price, and then we get like an ETF in America and like stuff goes ballistic. um and I think with crypto kind of like completely embracing Trump, and having that whole image, basically like people are associating Trump supporters with crypto people now. You've also kind of just blocked off a large percentage of the American population, right? Like even if it's just 20-30%, and I know it's more, that just dislikes Trump and dislikes the whole political spectrum, they're not gonna be as interested in having crypto, because they're like, this is basically, and I wish it wasn't so. I wish it wasn't so like you have to hate the other person, but that's kind of how American politics is right now. They just be like, hey, this is like this is the stuff of the enemy. Like if I'm buying this, I'm supporting the other side. And I generally think this is kind of also coming back to bite our ass. But also obviously all of that regulation, like all the SEC cases and all that kind of stuff, would very likely not have stopped under a Democratic
Yeah,
president, right?
probably get worse.
So like, it's a little bit of a trade-off.
Pick your
Trump came
poison,
in,
dude.
yeah, I mean, literally, Trump came in and extracted a shitload of money, allegedly, in Minecraft,
Yes.
according to Congress and the chart that I saw on there.
Yeah.
Um, extracted a lot of money with multiple coins, and that basically led to the entire destruction of the trenches, right? I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, completely.
Like that completely fucked the entire altcoin market. And then you also have a bunch of people that just fucking hate him, that don't want to have anything to do with crypto anymore. But also, like, if it was a Democrat, you would have had just stupid regulation, sadly.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like pick your
It's
poison.
almost like different time horizons. I feel like with Trump, you speed run the extraction because everyone just wants to steal and crime is legal. And with the Democrats, just be a continued expensive, uncertain war of attrition,
Yeah.
with maybe a few bigger headline pieces. But it's kind of, well, at least with I feel like the Trump one has ripped the Band-Aid off. Like, okay, yeah, crime is legal, all of retail gets shafted, everyone steals, and it's bad. But at least the landscape is now clear for in N period of time to build stuff with less uncertainty. So I feel like that's slightly better because at least there's a path forward after you
Yeah.
get wrecked than with a likely Democratic, executive branch at the very least, which would just be consistently chipping away at crypto. But they both, where we are at the moment in time, they obviously both kind of suck.
Yeah.
And
I
speaking of
honestly think it wouldn't have made a difference. Like, do you remember the chart that I drew up where I was like,
the
if we
inauguration
get,
one,
yeah, where I was like, if Harris wins, we just dump it, but then come back up.
yes,
And if Trump win, we just pump and then dump.
that was a good
It,
call. Yeah, that was a very good call. I think you surprised yourself with that one to some extent.
I mean, I was 100% certain this was gonna play out. And the
Yeah, and so
moment
you
we
held
started,
ETH instead. What the hell, dude?
yeah, and then the moment we started like breaking out, and Trump actually did some crypto stuff, I was like, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
Well, turns out I should have listened to myself more. I mean, I did take profit on that leg, in parts because of that thought. So I'm not like, it's fine, but
Yeah.
I could have taken advantage of this much more. Just having that foresight, that, because that was basically my whole argument. You're
Yes.
gonna get Trump, and people are gonna be euphoric as fuck, because they know that like just the regulation is gonna change, which gonna pump price. But then crime is just gonna come in and ruin everything.
Yes.
Like, that's literally what's happening. And that's kind of the trouble we're going through right now. Basically, everyone got shafted and crime took over.
Yes.
And now we need to digest it. And I think, honestly, for crypto, it wouldn't have made a difference, because I also think that the lobbying that the crypto people did in the US would have also kind of, I mean, and there's a bunch of people, like a bunch of Democrats that got lobbied in, right? It's not just Republicans, like crypto-friendly. There's a bunch of crypto-friendly Democrats as well.
Yeah, it was very strategic, the money spent.
So I think it would have just taken a while, basically, to get to the same result. The Trump result is just aggressive, like aggressive ripping the Band-Aid off, but then also aggressive crime. And the Harris win would have been basically like a little bit aggressive to the downside immediately, just because people were positioned wrongly. But then I think it would have that would have been an overcorrection, and we would have bounced. We would have ended at the same price anyway.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, here we are in this version of reality after all, you know.
Yeah.
And the grass is always greener on the other side, as they say.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's like both would have been. I think I would have traded Harris better, because that dump would have been such an obvious.
Oh one. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I was quite late to the breakout portion of the leg. Like, I didn't slam it immediately after we had that Friday show, where it was just like, hey, this is the best proximity invalidation you're gonna get. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. That was good, you know. But I was a few days later than our audience in acting on that, and you know, there were a ton of meme leverage, whatever opportunities to slam in the meantime. I was mostly BTC focused. At least I avoided ETH, so I kind of feel good about that.
I didn't avoid ETH, but I also got XRP. So
there you go. Yeah, that's way better. That's way better. And then on the way down, I was essentially saved by busyness and laziness during this range. I was like,
we're such good hosts.
I know, we're such good hosts. It's unreal. Like, that's literally it. Trade worse than our Friday show audience members who slammed the breakout. Cut it what I thought was early, but was just like a few, I think it was like 1 or 2 weeks short from when we really started ranging. And then don't rebuy despite there being good setups because of laziness and busyness. And also there's like weird TA cope. Like, I've written about this in the past. When I saw that big wick on the 8th or whatever it is, the 2nd or 3rd of February, I think mentally that gave me a pretty good excuse. I was like, well, you know, I saw that and I was like, well, you know, I can't fucking trade this daily close because the wick is so big. It'll probably get backfilled or whatever. And then I just kind of stopped looking at it. And I think if I were more actively plugged into the market and looking at how other things were moving after that wick, I probably would have come to the conclusion that, you know, it's like the backfill probability on this is pretty low. Maybe I should punt. But it just gave me nice intellectual cover to be lazy. Being like, oh, dude, there's like a big wick and those get filled 100% of the time as a true and tried trading statistic. So I don't know. I feel like a lot of trading goes that way, though. Don't you? I mean, it doesn't get talked about much. But like sometimes you get lucky on account of bad decisions and being lazy in some sort of perfect storm. It works the other way around as well. Like, you know, you really want to take a trade, but you miss it and it ends up being an absolute stinker and you thank God for it. Other times you're awake when, you know, you normally wouldn't be and take a setup that you wouldn't normally take and it ends up being a banger. There's just so much noise and variance involved in this type of thing. For me, I generally just got lucky on the downside protection due to intellectual cope about wicks. And before that, laziness and doing other breakout related stuff. So, you know, like that's okay with me. I've always been on the side of keep more money, make less, but I do wish at least on the way up, BTC aside, I don't know, copy traded you on XRP for one. Like, something of that nature would have been nice. But Don, ETH, when are you going to, what's going on with this ETH USD position? When asked about it on Twitter, you're always like, I don't look at it, which is
I don't
cool.
look at it.
So you did the whole cycle of like trader to investor to, are you joining the Ethereum Foundation? Or like, what's
I
next?
told you when I bought it, I was like, if this goes against me, I'm just going to be an investor.
That's true. That's true.
And
when's the earnings call? You got any questions planned for that one?
I mean, no, it's obviously not going great, right? Like it's like, I think I'm like down like 30-ish% on ETH.
That's tough.
It's not that
Have
great.
I ever seen you ETH a drawdown that big?
It's been years actually.
Yeah. It feels
on the
like
spot position, I don't actually remember the last time I've been down that much on the spot position.
Oof.
Don't really.
But
I don't really care. Like I don't really care too much this cycle. Like to me, every other cycle has been max value extraction, right? Like where I've been like, okay, I want to hit the bottom, I want to hit the top, and I've been really good with this, right? Like the last cycles, I mean, I'm just gonna pat myself on the back, and I was like, I really hit the nail on the head most of the time. This cycle, I want to have exposure. just in case. Like, I don't want to be the guy that doesn't have exposure to the market that I look at 24/7 for the last couple of years, right? So I'm just kind of like happy having some exposure, at least right now. And so I'm just kind of like, the cycle's been decent to me, even though it's been a shit cycle. I kind of like, I took advantage of it early, and now I'm just in coasting mode. I'm like, I generally still think that at least for altcoins, that like, I think ETH, for example, is not done for the cycle yet. I think the top 4 ETH is not in this cycle. But I could be completely wrong, right? But I'm fine with having exposure and losing some money more than I would be fine with sitting and not having exposure and seeing it go. So that's kind of like how I look at it right now. That's why I'm like, it's 30% down and actually just completely fine with it. And I'm actually just waiting for this to give me a bullish setup. And it hasn't, to be fair. So I can lever up, right? Like that's
see. Yeah, okay.
So basically I'm just kind of like, I'm happy to have exposure. I got lucky enough in the cycle that I took enough profits where I'm like, okay, if I completely fuck this, like if ETH goes to 0 tomorrow, I'd be sad about it because obviously I lost money, but I wouldn't be like distraught over it.
Yeah.
Like it's just how
so ETH is like the suicide upside hedge. And then there's like an independent trader brain being like, can this thing properly nuke so I can put on some leverage type thing?
I actually don't want it to nuke necessarily. I just wanted to put like a bullish setup in place, right? And we talked about ETH BTC, ETH USD on the weekly, and I was like, hey, you need to get back above like. And we talked about this for weeks, right? Where I was like, hey, above 3.6. Do you remember like when you put on the weekly chart? Like I was like above 3.6, like that. That's obvious. At that point, we can start talking about like upside and breakout potential while we were trading at 3.2, right? And then it broke down, and I was like, hey, now like above 3K, that's where I'm gonna take more risk. And then we broke down again now, and we're trading at 2K. And that's kind of how I look at it. Like I want to see a reclaim right now, like above 2. I think above 2.7, 2.8 is where I'd be more than happy.
So the breakdown origin, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of like looking at it that way, and I just want to increase the risk.
It might not happen on this weekly close. I'm just saying.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe not. Like it's obviously a piece of shit, and I mean, just generally any other cycle DonAlt would make fun of the way I look at it this cycle, but I'm just in a completely different spot this cycle.
Well, I think that's it, right? The context is the main thing. Like imagine if you just joined and your main make it clip trade was buying ETH at 3K. There's no way you can rationally justify then saying, oh, well, it's 2.1, but I'm still holding because I didn't think ETH is done for this cycle. That's insane, right? That's a really bad argument. Whereas if you're in a position of, you caught XRP from like 50 cents or whatever, like BTC, etc., then that's a completely different just place in the cycle and portfolio construction. I mean, I still think it's a bit on the wonky side, as you know.
No, I mean, I will actually, like, I will admit, like, this was shit. Like, this was a shit trade. Like that's just like a shit trade. I mean, it worked out immediately, right? Like I bought it and I was on side, but I should have just taken profit. Like it went from where I bought it at like 2.9 3K ish. It went to 4K immediately, which was the only ETH strength we've gotten that entire. But basically, like I nailed that initial part, but then I just held on because I'm complacent this cycle, and I will repeat it because people kind of like think I'm still the same. I'm very different now. Like, I mean, this is the first cycle that one, I have a child, second one's on the way.
Bless.
2, like I'm just in a completely different financial situation than in prior cycles. And then 3, I also already made enough this cycle where I'm just kind of like, okay, if the rest of it goes to 0, the rest of it goes
even
to
if
0.
it were just the XRP trade alone, realistically, it'd be like, who cares about a little bit of ETH? Drawdowns,
So like that's kind of the situation. But I think like on ETH, you basically want to start closing above 2.6, and we can talk about it. Like until then, this is just an awful chart, and I mean, ETH BTC looks better to me. Like I look at it, and I actually am not that disgusted right now. This is obviously like still looks like a piece of garbage. But this is the capitulation event that we talked about for the entire drawdown.
In 2022.
Yeah, I mean, we were like, don't buy the bleed.
Yeah.
And then it kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And like we've talked about that it needs, like maybe it needs this capitulation event. I think we had it on the 3rd of February. That was a proper capitulation to me. We're kind of backfilling the wick right now. It's usually like where I would want to pick up the pieces. Something we talked about a lot in the past, where you kind of like have this. And if you go back in history, right, like for example, 2016, you had like the whole capitulation. You have wick, you fill it, and then you bounce, and that was the bottom in 2016.
Yeah.
You have this quite a bit where it's like you get the capitulation. Even in 2019, you get that kind of like backfill of sorts. Wasn't as aggressive of a capitulation, but you get that backfill with another retest, and then you go. Like this is very typical for altcoins as a whole.
Yeah.
You get these massive liquidation events, then a massive bounce that retraces, and people get hilariously bearish on them. I'm not hating on this chart anymore. Like I think this is pretty good, as good as it can be when it looks this shit.
Yeah, sure. Biggest fish in a small pond type of thing.
Yeah, but basically you look at ETHUSD and that needs to put in a lot of work. And I mean, if Bitcoin stays weak,
yeah,
that's your ETH BTC may be putting in a bottom range. I think that's the most likely outcome here. We just go sideways for a little bit on ETH BTC and then actually go up. I think that's kind of my going thesis on ETH BTC. It just doesn't really help you if Bitcoin goes to 60K, because then you're gonna sit there and you're gonna take a massive L on ETH. But I'm generally like I don't hate on the ETH BTC chart. I'm not loving it. I do love the XRP BTC chart, but that has like historical kind of drawdowns that I don't necessarily like. So there's like a downside to that as well. Basically, like XRP just goes up aggressively and goes down aggressively. So even if the chart looks good, you can get completely shafted.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is just a small pullback. It's like, no, you don't understand. Any pullback is bad because it only goes one way.
Yeah, but basically, in my mind, and I could be wrong, and like I said, I'm very complacent, so don't take my word as gospel. But basically, in my mind, we're kind of like in that middle consolidation of 2017 right now. And I think we're gonna get one more push to the upside on XRP BTC. And I think that's going to be quite large and it's going to catch people off guard. But that said, like if the macro situation devolves further, right, and you get like a proper trade war, like Trump is saying like, hey, I'm going to do some tariffs, and he's expecting Europe to roll over, right? If Europe rolls over, that's probably like, okay, we've priced that in.
Sure.
If Europe doesn't roll over and just kind of like says like, fuck you, which I think is more likely than them rolling over, actually, and imposes tariffs on the US. I think that is kind of priced in at this point. But if then Trump is kind of like, fuck you guys, this is more tariffs for us, so I'm going to do more for you, I think that is not priced in.
This is some premier macro analysis, by the way. This is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, but I mean, that's like legit how low quality this shit is now. Basically, the macro situation where it's just kind of like you kind of have to hope that the politicians in charge don't just kind of lose their shit over other people's politicians in charge, right? And I basically think a proper trade war is definitely not priced in, and then it doesn't really matter. Like you can have the best setups and you can have the best looking altcoin charts. You're gonna get completely shafted, but you're also gonna get completely shafted in the stock market. So it doesn't really matter where your money is. Otherwise, if you think there's any sanity left, and we're not gonna have like a trade war, because this doesn't really help anyone, right? Like a proper trade war doesn't really help anyone. Terrorists might, trade war doesn't. If we don't get that, I think most of it has been priced in now. And then I actually think there's going to be upside on stuff like this. And the charts, to me, on the Bitcoin pairs, like you go to Litecoin Bitcoin, that's good. XRP Bitcoin, that's good. ETH BTC, that's okay. Even Sol BTC, I think can have like a little bit of a complacency bounce. It's the one that I like the least, just because it looks exactly like ETH did when we shit talked it in 2022.
Yeah.
Like literally 1-to-1 the same chart. And we were bearish on ETH back then, so it's really hard to be bullish on Sol when it looks the exact same way. But yeah, there's like I open up a bunch of BTC pairs and I'm like, okay, this is just poised for upside. So yeah,
the
take
USD
that.
pairs, I don't know. Have you gone
Awful.
through your watch list recently? Just like clicking through old USD. I mean, you know, we're
Yeah.
discussing where we are cyclically and stuff, but in practical terms, I mean, most people are at
bear market lows.
Yeah. Like
Look
up.
at Sol USD, like it's horrendous.
Yeah, even Sol USD is rough. That's been a tough month.
Like it's back at the support that we've been funny.
Dude, I know it's back at this. I was going to mention that. Yeah, how many times have we fudded this level? Probably more times than I've had hot dinners, mate. Like this is a. Let's wonder if the plunge protection team is still around for another shift. You know,
Dude, we're gonna shit talk this level until the time it hits the level. We're like, okay, this time it's not gonna fail. Like, and then it's gonna.
Then it goes down 50% or whatever. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Sol, I would just like me personally. This is at support. So I mean, if you're a Sol lover and you think the whole Sol hate is overblown, this is the best time that you're gonna get because if this doesn't hold, you're gonna look at like what? Like there's no level underneath it, realistically.
I mean, you'd expect a pretty massive break, right? This is like BTC 6K style, technically speaking. So what, like
$80? like
yeah, well, realistically, if this is peak bottom things, but if this support level breaks, I'm gonna do the percentage tool. You know, if you're looking at 30-40% off a massive level break, then yeah, you get like 80-ish, which by the way isn't the wildest thing in the world because there's like that monthly cluster there, you know.
I like that support.
That's not terrible. Like $100 is at the extremity, but then if you take the lowest close, that's like 90-ish on the monthly. So there is stuff there on Sol. It's just been a matter of, do you want to trade the millionth test of 120-ish? The answer every time we've said no has been yes. So do with that what you will. By the way, I think there's a similar kind of risk in ETH USD. If you look at it from like a weekly time frame, there are a lot of fucky wicks in this area, you know? Like there's the high going back to April 23, and that was kind of our shelf. And that's kind of felt like the comfort spot for ETH, and it's also the round number, like 2K plus.
Yeah.
So I think if you're short-term trading, this is a really interesting area just to do business in general. Just see who gets aggressive, if anyone's going to do their ass, liquidations below the round number, all the wick spike type of stuff. I think it should be towards the top of your watch list, but it's like a similar thing, you know. If the market wants to roll over, for a lot of these pairs, they're at 6K-ish style floors, and those breaks tend to be pretty nasty. So
yeah,
I think the best case, even for like a short-term bounce, is this kind of round number extremity mean reversion, right? Like BTC sub 80K, get some life. That means Sol at these wicks, get some life. And ETH 2.1K-ish also through these wicks, get some life. And then you can panic later, like once whatever bounce plays out. I think like if you're short-term trading, that's a very interesting framework to have. But like if you're fat, complacent, lazy, bigger picture type of person, then I think it comes back to the BTC narrative of, well, it broke down from the long consolidation. If it wants to get more discounted, I'll buy it. If it wants to show more significant strength, I'll buy it. But otherwise, this doesn't sort of jump out, you know?
Yeah. One thing I do want to say is like you have Solana at that long-standing support that I fucking hate.
Sure.
Like fucking 120 whatever. Like I hate it. And then you have, for the first time in a long time, strength on altcoins. In my opinion, like this, I could be completely off base, but to me, the last couple of days have been insane strength on altcoins. Like this is like really, really strong, and people don't really talk about it because they're obviously losing money still. But you basically have strength on Sol BTC, and you have the Sol USD support. I think it doesn't really get much better than that. But if you're wrong, like it's gonna be fucking awful. And it's the same across the board, in my opinion. Like you have the same story with XRP, kind of like chilling at the last USD supports. And and then you have a little bit of strength on the Bitcoin pair. You have Litecoin, which is actually still at the highs on the USD pair, and has strong strength on the Bitcoin pair. And then you have like you go through the list, and it's basically they're all at or near do or die levels, right, on the USD pairs. Maybe that's why they have strength on the Bitcoin pairs, because people are desperately trying to defend them before they just go to shit. In that case, you're kind of shit out of luck and you're fucked if you buy them and it rolls over. Or it's just basically just a sign of strength and you have like nice confluence. Hard for me to say. Me, I'm just chilling still. I want to see strength to be buying more, and or weakness to buy more. But these are not necessarily for me. I look at the chart right now. I actually like a lot of that, the stuff that I see, which could be just peak complacency, and I'm just like completely washed. Could actually see that be the case. I'm
So
not too worried about it.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to add. Like, this is a interesting spot in the market to make a video, right? Because like realistically,
it's gonna be obvious in 3 days.
Yeah,
straight up,
totally.
It's gonna be obvious where the market is gonna go in 3 days.
And where most people are at the moment, they're either like super comfortable because they're de-risked enough during the range or at the highs or whatever, and are just have the luxury of looking for an opportunity, or they're still holding all their positions and absolutely shitting it, doing the whole mental experiment of, oh my god, how much will I be down if it goes down another X%? And like neither of those are particularly good. And the thing is, it's only in times like this when actually having like cash or being in a position to deploy proves how worthwhile it is. Because every other moment in the market, the whole thing is sidelined, lol, sidelined, you know? It's like actively made fun of. And then something like this happens, which happens every time, and suddenly it feels like the best position to be in the world, you know? And it's always helpful for us to provide kind of framing on us, because if you're looking for hyper plugged in, trying to trade every move in the trenches, I need to extract everything I can from the cycle before it's all over, disproportionate risk type of thing, this is like quite possibly the worst place to get that type of insight, right? Just like cards on the table, I think there is a degree of washedness to both of us, like just by definition.
100%.
I think there's a degree of complacency from both of us by definition. And I think there's just like a lack of urgency overall from both of us. And sometimes that can be really good because it means that we obviously trade differently, but I think if you, in broad bucket terms, this aligns. Like there's no real urgency to kind of force trades, which can be nice. But at the same time, there could be something that's a pretty good opportunity, but it doesn't exceed the laziness threshold, right? Doesn't accelerate through that. And as a result, you won't kind of hear us talking about it. So that's just like all cards in the table. I got pretty lucky, realistically, by life stuff plus breakout busyness plus everything else to not eat shit on this drawdown. You know, in your ETH position, that might be like an easy one to meme with as well. But without the context of XRP and BTC on the way up, the analysis ends up being incomplete. So there are no kind of very good answers here. I think just the best thing to do is to present the facts as they are, and that can hopefully at least inform our kind of market views and sense of urgency and whatever else, because most of the arguing that I see on Twitter is more or less disagreements about timeframes. Someone who's just kind of ridden BTC and Sol on the way up and caught a few outliers is not in the same position as someone who's just been like who entered these coins like 2 weeks ago, right? And they just end up fighting each other on Twitter, arguing about whether the cycle is over and the market's topped and all this type of stuff. It's just bullshit noise, realistically. And I think we did the best that we could in the current circumstances as far as the TA stuff goes, which is, I mean, this would be the case for any chart. You have a long consolidation that breaks down. Your best choices are to, if you want to scalp / diddle in the middle with mean reversion around round numbers, liquidations, order flow stuff, that's fine. But bigger picture allocation wise, like weekly and daily market structure is broken. The range is broken to the downside. The compelling areas to do business are either the invalidation of the break, which is to say like above 80, 90, or at a deeper discount where you just kind of have to buy because it's at such a good level. and so contextually discounted at the very least. That's kind of it for BTC. And you can more or less, I think, apply that analysis to the rest of the market, like especially if your view is correct that there's some underlying relative strength in alts. That relative strength can only rise to the surface if BTC just like stops dragging everything down. So I think this is one of those few windows where maybe the dispersion is less extreme. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but you can do the kind of BTC transplant to alts idea. Like you think BTC is bottom, you slam some bids or you lift some offers on the altcoin side and see what shakes out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well said.
Cool.
I think so too.
Oh, well, we'll see, right? We'll see. That's all I've got. Have you?
That's all I've got too.
Okay, well, happy monthly close to those of you who celebrate. We understand it's a holiday of great significance in the TA world. Thank you to Woo for supporting the show. The link to the perp dex is in the description if you haven't checked that out and you want to spread your counterparty risk a bit. Do so. I will say that overall, when liquidity is higher, and the market's moving like this. When volatility is higher, liquidity tends to be a bit worse just in the market as a whole. And also, if you're trading your usual position sizes, except the market's moving 5, 6, 10% instead of 2, 3%, you can get burned pretty quickly. So if you need to gut/reality check your risk tolerance and position sizing, I think it's a pretty good time to do that. You and I both, Don, have been on the wrong side of doing that, like on BitMEX back in the day, where you're used to trading a certain amount and then volatility like triples and you're still trading the same amount. It's not as fun, believe it or not. So good time.
I mean, it's more fun if you're right.
Well, it depends how the trade goes.
Yep.
So good time to do some homework. Thank you for those of you who still leave comments, listen, etc. We did try to swear less this episode for those comments about listening to this show with your children. I have reported you to the relevant authorities for terrible parenting, for poisoning the minds of the youth by letting them listen to us. But nonetheless, hope you'll have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week to discuss how obvious whatever move happened was.
Bye-bye.
Bye.